Welcome, dear listeners, to another spine-chilling episode of our scary stories. I'm your host, your guide, your storyteller in this realm of shadows and secrets. Tonight, we leave the comfort of the familiar and journey to the abandoned ghost town where the Infinity Library awaits. Will you dare to delve into its depths? Can you withstand the icy grasp of dread as we follow one man's chilling tale? Hush now, quiet your thoughts, listen to the whispers of the wind, for our story begins. In a place where time loses its grip and fate is written within the silent pages of destiny. Harold, a man who had traded bustling academia for the tranquil melodies of retirement, found his otherwise mundane road trip disturbed by the sudden apparition of an eerie town. It seemed as if time itself had forgotten this settlement, an architectural ghost shrouded in the silence of abandonment. As he drove the car through the desolate streets, his eyes were drawn to faded Victorian houses, their once vibrant hues dulled by the relentless assault of the years. Spindly branches of skeletal trees swayed in the cool wind, their gnarled forms stretching over the deserted walkways like spectral sentinels. The air was heavy with the scent of decay, of crumbled brick and moldering wood, a musty testament to the ghost town's forgotten past. At the heart of this ghost town, like a decaying crown jewel, stood a library. It was a grand structure of Greek Revival architecture, white marble columns holding up a pediment etched with ancient wisdom symbols, all weathered by the remorseless passage of time. Despite its dilapidation, it held an imposing aura, a stubborn monument to a once vibrant intellectual culture. Feeling an unexplainable pull, Harold exited his car, his ears pricking at the haunting whisper of the wind curling through the ghost town. He could taste the dust in the air, carried aloft by the wind from the decaying ruins. His heart pounded in his chest with a mix of dread and anticipation, each step towards the library an echo in the grim silence that enveloped the town. The giant oak doors of the library creaked ominously as he pushed them open, the sound echoing through the grand but derelict building. He stepped inside, feeling the cool shadow of the library swallow him whole, replacing the desert heat with an uncanny chill. His eyes took a moment to adjust to the gloom, and then they widened in awe. Before him unfolded an endless expanse of tall, cobweb-draped bookshelves. Dust particles floated lazily in the thin shafts of sunlight infiltrating the stained glass windows, adding an ethereal quality to the vast space. The scent of old paper, of ancient knowledge imprinted on ink-stained pages, pervaded the air, a welcome respite from the decay outside. The silent grandeur of the place was broken only by the distant dripping of water somewhere deep in the library, like the heartbeat of this forgotten intellectual sanctuary. The hair on the back of Harold's neck prickled as he realized that amidst the musty tomes and decaying parchment, he was not alone. His gaze fell upon a book laid on a mahogany table, the faded leather-bound cover inscribed with his own name. The letters seemed to shimmer ominously in the dim light. A sense of dread and curiosity filled him as he hesitated for a moment, and then reached out to touch the book. As his fingers grazed the cover, he felt a jolt of anticipation, the first stirrings of a story yet to unfold, a journey yet to begin. And so, in the heart of a forgotten ghost town, Harold dared to turn the first page of a tale that was his own, oblivious to the haunting, spectral dance that was about to unfold in the hallowed halls of the Infinity Library. Entering deeper into the library felt akin to crossing a boundary into another realm. The meager daylight diminished further, usurped by a mysterious twilight. Uncountable tomes, stacked haphazardly, lined the labyrinthine expanse. The dusty carpet underfoot seemed to dampen the outside world's sounds, leaving the space in an almost sacred silence, punctuated only by Harold's quiet, apprehensive footfalls. With each step he took, a sense of gravity seemed to descend. It wasn't the tangible, physical kind, but something far deeper, an uncanny weight of countless stories, of innumerable lives and histories contained within the withered pages around him. The air was heavy, not just with dust, but also with the thick scent of old parchment and worn leather, the perfumes of antiquity. Reaching the table, Harold gingerly picked up the book. Its leather cover felt cold, oddly rigid under his fingers, as if resisting the intrusion of the present into its timeless narrative. He sank into a chair, the old wood groaning under the sudden weight, and began to leaf through the book, each page releasing the distinct musk of age-old ink. His eyes scanned the opening lines, and he found himself recoiling in disbelief. In elegant calligraphy, the book perfectly narrated the earliest days of his life. His childhood home, the scent of his mother's baking, the barking of their old dog, Buster, all were captured with an uncanny level of detail. It was as though the invisible author had stood right there alongside him, observing his life unfold. He read on, bewitched by the flawless depiction of his past. It was an intimate window into his memories, some he had forgotten, and some he wished he had. It was disturbing to relive forgotten traumas, to experience joyous moments laced with the knowledge of ensuing heartbreaks. The book left no stone unturned, delving deep into his soul, uncovering secrets he buried deep within his psyche. The gentle rustling of turning pages, the echo of his own breathing in the vast, mysterious library, the chill of the marble floor seeping through the soles of his shoes, all these nuances built an atmosphere of haunting anticipation. He was no longer just an observer in this eerie monument of antiquity, but a participant in an unfolding narrative. Gradually, the distant past made way for more recent years, the narrative leading him through his academic struggles, professional victories, personal losses, and finally his retirement. He paused, dread knotting in his stomach. The book hadn't ended, the remaining pages were not blank, beckoning him into the unknown. The library seemed to watch him, an age-old guardian bearing witness to his dread, as Harold sat there, hesitating. The gentle murmur of the wind against the window panes, the distant rustle of weather-worn pages, seemed like whispers urging him on. Would he dare to journey into the untraveled path of his life? With a deep breath, Harold steeled himself, his grip tightening on the book. With his heart pounding a staccato rhythm in his chest, he turned the page and ventured into the present, standing on the precipice of the terrifying unknown. As Harold delved deeper into the library's uncanny volume, the pages whisked him back into the labyrinth of his past. Scenes from his life unfurled before his mind's eye, so vivid he could almost touch them. He read about the schoolyard where he'd first skinned his knee and tasted the bitter tang of defeat. The aroma of fresh paper and chalk filled his nostrils as he relived his first day in college. Each memory, etched in words, buzzed with a life of its own, a time capsule of fleeting emotions. The narrative was relentless in its scrutiny, unearthing long-buried feelings, secrets that he had shared with no one. The raw intensity of young love, the gnawing anxiety of his first job interview, the dull throb of grief when he'd lost his parents. The book bared it all. It was as if his mind had been flayed open, every concealed thought, every suppressed memory laid out for inspection. With every unveiled secret, the library seemed to draw closer around him, the walls pressing in as if feeding on his distress. The scent of old paper grew stronger, the silence deepening, the only sound being the soft rustle of pages turning and the erratic rhythm of his heart. He read of the nights he'd spent under the starlit sky, wrestling with existential questions, of the countless dreams he'd let go, replaced by regret that hung like a specter. It was an uncomfortable reckoning, like gazing into a mirror that revealed not his physical form, but the stark silhouette of his soul. Even the air around him seemed to grow heavier, resonating with the raw exposure of his inner self. The once intriguing mystery of the library was now a torturous maze, each dusty corner echoing with the specters of his past. Despite the psychological horror, he read on, entranced. The precision, the acute attention to detail, it was all too compelling, too personal. He was falling, spiraling into the whirlpool of his past, unable to tear himself away. The book, the library, the ghost town, it all merged into a single entity, relentlessly pulling him towards the unfathomable abyss. Yet amidst the trepidation and dread, there was an odd sense of catharsis. Confronting old demons, re-experiencing joyous moments, it was as if he was healing and hurting all at once. This dance of pain and nostalgia, fear and acceptance, it was intoxicating in its peculiar, horrifying way. However, even as he navigated this strange journey, Harold felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck. An eerie realization was creeping up on him, the unnerving fact that the book hadn't ended at his present. There were more pages, pages yet to be explored, pages that held his future. In the following chapters, Harold found himself immersing into the narrative of his present. The book was frighteningly up to date. It began with his unplanned detour into the ghost town, his initial fascination with the abandoned buildings, and his reluctant yet irresistible draw towards the library. As he read, he could feel the cold seep through his bones, just as it did when he first entered the library. The weathered texture of the wooden door, the sighing echo of his footsteps on the marble floor, the strangely comforting scent of aged paper were all depicted with unnerving accuracy. Each paragraph read like an echo of his thoughts and actions. The author was not just an observer, but seemed to dwell within his very consciousness. Harold couldn't shake off the sensation that his mind was being read. Every thought, every doubt was being dissected and recorded. It was like an unwanted invasion, the infringement of his privacy by an unseen entity. The surroundings of the library felt more imposing than before. The towering bookshelves seemed to leer down at him, the dim, flickering light casting monstrous shadows that danced in the corners of his vision. Each creak of the floorboards, each distant whisper of the wind, seemed laden with foreboding. Harold found himself caught between his present and the recording of it in the book. It was like being in a strange state of déjà vu where the lines between the actual and the recorded blurred. He saw himself reading the book in the book itself, and the recursive paradox sent a chill down his spine. The room grew colder, the ancient, silent tomes around him seeming to breathe in the unease. His fingers felt numb, the worn-out leather of the book cover increasingly rigid. The scent of musty paper grew intense, overlaying the underlying decay, like an ominous shroud tightening around him. Still, he read on, a moth drawn to the ghastly flame. The narrative was a mirror reflecting his current state, his inner turmoil and fear. His eyes, wide and anxious, darted from the book to the shadowy corners of the room, his senses heightened by the creeping terror. He dared not consider the remaining chapters. The fact that there were more pages yet to be read filled him with dread. He found himself on a precipice, teetering between the known and the unknown, and the thought of venturing forward into the uncharted territory of his future was terrifying. But the curiosity, the desire to know, was a gnawing need. As the twilight deepened outside, casting longer, darker shadows within the library, Harold found himself succumbing to the inexplicable allure of the unknown, a puppet drawn towards its strings. The turning of the next page was inevitable, the journey into the future imminent. Harold was teetering on the brink, the unturned pages of his future lying before him. The library seemed to thrum in silent anticipation, the rows of ancient books and shadow-draped corners pulsating with an ominous patience. Cautiously, with a breath he didn't know he'd been holding, Harold turned the page. The first line, written in the same fluid script, described his current moment, his hesitation, his fear, the cool, rigid texture of the page under his trembling fingers. The narrative continued to unfold, now leaping into a realm Harold hadn't yet lived. It began with a mundane projection, him leaving the ghost town, returning to his quiet life. He read of weekly grocery shopping, crossword puzzles on Sunday mornings, the simple routines of an old man living alone. But as he progressed, the text started to twist into a disturbingly unfamiliar trajectory. The story told of Harold meeting a stranger, a woman with bright green eyes and a contagious laugh. The details of this encounter were depicted with such vividness, it was as if he could hear her laughter echoing around the silent library. In the narrative, this woman, Isabella, became a regular part of his life. Together, they navigated through a beautiful blend of companionship and love, a dance he hadn't experienced in a long while. This section of the book felt warm, imbued with a profound sense of happiness that Harold had forgotten he could feel. But the tranquility was short-lived. The atmosphere in the library shifted, the air growing colder, as if reflecting the icy turn the story was about to take. Harold read on, his heart pounding, as the narrative veered into darkness. Isabella fell ill in the book, her vibrant life force slowly fading. The pages were filled with Harold's desperation, his failed attempts at finding a cure, and his heartbreaking acceptance of her impending doom. He could feel his heart ache with a sorrow he hadn't yet experienced, for a person he hadn't yet met. As he closed this chapter, he felt drained, the gravity of his foreseen loss weighing him down. The library felt heavier around him, the shadows looming larger and darker. His future stretched before him, a landscape of joy tainted by inevitable loss, like a beautiful painting streaked with black. His past, his present, his future, all lay bound within the confines of the library's mysterious book. Each chapter was an exploration into his own life's dimensions, a journey through time captured in ink. As Harold stared at the unexplored pages, the story yet untold, he understood that the journey was far from over. The greatest horrors were still waiting, hiding in the silent, unread pages of his future. After absorbing the tale of the unseen future, Harold sat in a stunned silence, the weight of his foreseen loss a crushing reality yet to unfold. The ethereal figure of Isabella lingered in his mind, a phantom from a future that he both yearned for and feared. Reluctantly, he ventured further into the uncharted territory of the book. The pages, smooth under his trembling fingers, revealed a narrative that grew increasingly ominous. In this grim future, Harold was portrayed as a man worn thin by grief. He was seen withdrawing from the world, his daily routines a mechanical performance, the world losing its color without Isabella. Each sentence, etched with the loneliness of his loss, was a wound on Harold's heart. He could feel the echo of his future self's sorrow seeping into his present, the edges of time blurring, blending pain with anticipation. As he progressed, the narrative deviated towards the inexplicable. It spoke of strange occurrences, of him hearing Isabella's laughter in the wind, of feeling her touch in his dreams. The book described him waking up to her favorite book on his nightstand, to the smell of her perfume in the living room. The detailed accounts filled the library with an unseen presence, a lingering essence of a love yet to exist. The atmosphere in the library felt denser, the silence echoing the spectral whispers of the book. The shadows seemed to flicker with unseen movements, the quiet corners pulsating with an eerie energy. Harold found himself caught in an eerie blend of dread and fascination, unable to break away from the narrative's pull. The narrative twisted further, diving deeper into the realm of the uncanny. Harold read of his future self's descent into madness. The text was punctuated by his desperate attempts to reach out to Isabella, his mind unraveling with each fruitless effort. His life was gradually consumed by his obsession with the apparition, his sanity slipping through the cracks of the inexplicable. The chilling description of his descent amplified the library's haunting aura. The air felt colder, the once comforting scent of old books now imbued with a hint of dread. The silence seemed to stretch, each passing second a throbbing reminder of his fate. With each turn of the page, his future unfolded like a grotesque play, his own life, a tragedy written in a script he could not alter. As he closed the chapter, the room around him pulsated with a grim silence. His eyes, wide with horror, stared at the remaining pages, his future's unknown horror looming in the unseen text. Dread filled Harold's heart as he grappled with his fears, both present and future. The lines of reality were fraying, the threads of his existence intertwining with the narrative's grim forecast. He was stuck in a chilling dance with time, his past, present, and future blending into a horrifying ballet of existence. In the face of an agonizing future, Harold found himself torn. The duality of his emotions, his desire for the love he hadn't yet experienced, and the dread of the despair to follow, created a tormenting whirlpool that consumed his thoughts. The library, once a realm of mystery and allure, now seemed an insidious trap, the ancient tomes like prison bars. The book on his lap had transformed from a curious artifact into an omen of grief. Still, the tantalizing grip of the unknown tugged at him, pulling him towards the unread pages. Harold took a shaky breath, the icy air of the library filling his lungs, and turned the next page. He dived into the darkened waters of his yet-to-be-lived life, each sentence a wave crashing against his sanity. The narrative painted a picture of his continuing obsession, of his spiraling downfall. The loss of Isabella, the apparitions, and his crumbling mental state were described with a chilling precision. It spoke of nights consumed by spectral whispers, of Harold seeing Isabella's form in the dim light of his living room. Each haunting episode, depicted with eerie clarity, sent a cold shiver down Harold's spine. He could almost hear the distant echoes of Isabella's laughter, could nearly see her ghostly apparition in the library's shadowy corners. The narrative, in its relentless march, led Harold into an abyss. He was losing grip on reality, becoming a prisoner of his own mind, trapped within the walls of his haunted house. His days and nights were blurred, consumed by the quest to reach Isabella, his life's purpose tethered to a spectral love. Around him, the library echoed with an eerie stillness, as if reflecting his future loneliness. His pulse seemed to beat in rhythm with the flickering lights, casting dancing shadows on the vast expanse of book-laden shelves. The air was thick with the musk of ancient lore, carrying the undercurrent of his impending doom. As Harold neared the end of this chapter, he was consumed by a sense of dread. His gaze, wide-eyed and anxious, shifted between the library's looming shadows and the dread-filled pages. His heart pounded in his chest like a drum, each beat echoing his mounting fear. The silence of the library was punctuated by the turn of each page, each phrase a somber tolling bell. With each word read, the fate that lay ahead became more daunting, the horror of his future more tangible. Closing the chapter, Harold was consumed by a chilling silence. His life, the tale of a man doomed by his own future, stared back at him from the worn-out pages, as the whispers of his fate echoed through the silent library. Harold realized his ordeal was far from over, the shadows of his future growing deeper with each passing moment. Caught in the tendrils of the terrifying narrative, Harold delved deeper into the text. His heart pounded as if in rhythm with the ticking of an unseen clock, his future inching closer with every heartbeat. This chapter was a tumultuous journey of mental descent. It spoke of nights filled with ghostly illusions, of whispers carried by the wind that he took as messages from Isabella. His house, once a symbol of his quiet, solitary existence, was now a stage for his torturous existence, every corner resonating with her absence. As he read on, the description of his own despair washed over him like a cold wave. He could feel his breath hitching at every account of his own grief, the words etching a chilling map of his imminent doom. The library seemed to sway in rhythm with his growing fear. The whispering silence held an edge of melancholy, the walls closing in on him as he navigated through his ill-fated narrative. The atmosphere was charged with an eerie energy, amplifying the sense of impending doom. The story morphed into an account of Harold's lost sanity. He read about himself speaking to Isabella's invisible presence, his voice echoing through the empty house. It spoke of him losing touch with the outside world, his reality constricted to the four walls that held Isabella's memories. With every sentence, Harold felt the chilling grip of the narrative tighten. His breath became shallow, the icy air of the library failing to fill his lungs. The library, with its ominous quiet and pressing shadows, felt like a vessel sailing him towards his horrific destiny. His eyes raced across the remaining pages, the text transforming into a string of tragedies. His life, according to the book, was spiraling into a never-ending cycle of despair, grief punctuated by glimpses of a ghostly past. The narrative ended with Harold isolated from the world, his existence shadowed by his loss, and haunted by the ghost of his love. As Harold closed the chapter, the weight of his future bore down on him. He was a marionette in the hands of fate, his life reduced to a ghostly dance with Isabella. Each word he read echoed in the oppressive silence of the library, the ominous energy curling around him like spectral tendrils. Each page turned was a step closer to his dreadful future, each chapter closure a milestone on his path to despair. His life was no longer his own, but a chilling tale bound within the library's book. The library, a silent observer to his horror, waited with bated breath as Harold, the tragic hero of his own life, braced himself for the final chapters of his ominous journey. Harold, now a captive of his own narrative, turned to the penultimate chapter with a sense of impending doom. The library's cold grip held him in place, the silence punctuated by the distant rustle of the ancient pages. The 9th chapter detailed his full-blown descent into madness. It was a grotesque symphony of his mental deterioration. Harold read about himself talking to thin air, arguing with the specter of Isabella, pleading with her to reveal herself. His future self's loss of connection with reality was now complete, and his life was a labyrinth of grief and hallucinations. The ancient walls of the library seemed to close in on him as he read, the shadows growing denser, the air heavy with the burden of his imminent future. The room reverberated with an eerie energy, each word echoing through the hushed stillness. The narrative described him wandering through his house aimlessly, stuck in a loop of his own past and future. Each day in the narrative was the same as the previous one, a carousel of longing, fear, and relentless despair. In this ghostly reality, Harold lived in the world that was no longer his own. The narrative described him slowly losing his identity, becoming a shadow in his own life. His existence was tethered to the phantom of Isabella, his world shrinking to the confines of his haunted dwelling. As Harold ventured deeper into the chapter, he could almost feel the walls of his future home closing in on him. The sensation of ghostly whispers filled his ears, the echo of Isabella's laughter reverberating through the silence of the library. He was becoming the tragic figure of his own tale, his present blurring with the ominous future. As he neared the end of the chapter, the library's aura seemed to shift. The dust particles in the air moved erratically. The ancient books murmured in low whispers. The library was a living, breathing entity, watching him unfurl his destiny. Harold closed the chapter, the dread of his impending future overwhelming him. He felt his life force draining out of him, the narrative consuming him. His fate, once a distant thought, now stood at his doorstep. With the turn of the next page, his doom would be sealed. With a shiver of fear and a heavy heart, he prepared to step into the final chapter of his haunting tale. Harold, lost in the labyrinth of his fate, opened the final chapter of his tale. The silence of the library was deafening, each rustle of the pages echoing like a haunting melody through the vast expanse of the ancient building. The beginning of the chapter outlined his complete isolation from the world. He had become a phantom in his own life, his existence revolving around the ghostly presence of Isabella. Each day was a repetitive cycle of hope and despair, his conversations with the unseen Isabella becoming the only reality he knew. The library mirrored his sense of despair, its aged books muttering ancient tales, the dim light casting long, morose shadows. The icy chill of the room gripped him, the air heavy with the dark prophecy the book held. The narrative now spoke of his failing health. His body, ravaged by the relentless mental torment and isolation, was surrendering to his doomed fate. Harold could feel his own life force waning as he read about his own downfall, his future appearing before his eyes in a torrent of cruel reality. The story spun into a chilling description of his final days. His hours filled with ghostly conversations, his body growing frailer. The once vibrant Harold was now a skeletal figure clinging to a life that was slipping away from his grasp. The library echoed his looming end, its stony silence resonating with the rhythm of his ticking life clock. The eerie shadows danced on the walls, the faint whispers of the ancient tomes seeming to carry his death knell. Harold's eyes traced the final sentences of his story. The narrative spun a picture of his last moments, a tragic end to a love-blighted life. His final breath was taken whispering Isabella's name, a ghostly farewell to the spectral love that had haunted his life. As he shut the book, a shudder ran down his spine. His destiny was now etched in the annals of the Infinity Library. The deathly silence filled the room, the icy chill of his fate enveloping him. The library, now the keeper of his life's story, seemed to sigh in the end. Its ancient tomes whispered the tale of Harold's life and his tragic end, a new addition to its timeless collection. Harold, sitting in the heart of the silent library, felt a grim peace. His future, though filled with dread, was now a known entity. His life, its every turn chronicled in the eerie book, was now a part of the Infinity Library. His fate had been written, and the library now waited, its timeless wisdom silent, for the script of Harold's tragic tale to play out. We've reached the end, dear listeners. The last echoes of our tale fade into the silence of the night. How did it feel to traverse the dusty aisles of the Infinity Library, to witness a man's destiny written, sealed, and delivered by unseen hands? As we close this episode, remember, the specter of our story lingers in the shadowy corners of your mind. Will you dare to venture again into our world of haunted tales? Until then, remember, the night is dark, the wind is cold, and here on our Scary Stories, we are never alone. This is our Scary Stories signing off for tonight.